Have you ever stumbled across a story online that hits you so hard it doesn't even feel like just some random post? Today I was scrolling through Reddit and found a few stories like that. Way too real, way too creepy to ignore. I've got a feeling you're going to want to hear these. So, no more waiting, let's dive right in.
Story 1.
The man walked in at 2 a.m., dragging something black behind him. The way it moved didn't sit right. Neither did he. The receptionist felt it immediately. The way he walked, stiff and uneven, like a scarecrow with one leg shorter than the other. He hid greasy blonde hair beneath a 10-gallon hat, spurs clicking as he moved. I watched the security footage later. His lips were white and thin, his teeth crooked, his mouth twisted into a half-smile, like he was second from laughter. He was dragging a massive black Rottweiler. The dog resisted, back paws sliding across the floor. The camera didn't pick up sound, but later, the two gals at reception told me what he said. He's acting possessed. They handed him intake forms. He hobbled back to a bench, and I watched through the lens as another client, a woman holding a cat carrier, subtly slid a few seats away. I looked up his paperwork. The address led to some warehouse out in the scrublands, 3 states away. The name seemed fake too. Keaton. No records. No online presence. It didn't seem to fit him. But the dog's name? Mutt. That was the only detail I believed. You might wonder why I checked. It's not standard protocol. I don't usually do this. But the events of the last few nights led me to my search. When he handed the paperwork back, he sat down again, dragging the dog with him like a sack of flour. He leaned against the wall, arms folded, eyes fixed ahead. He barely moved, like a corpse propped upright. His dog didn't move much either. Just sat there, waiting. We see a lot of characters here. Some genuinely kind folks, too. But this man? Something about him was wrong. I stepped into the lobby to bring him into an exam room. It took him a second to register me, like he was in a trance. And then the smell hit me. Stale cigarettes, gas fumes, and beneath that, something worse. A rotten, greasy stench that clung to the air. The dog sat still, vacant, a husk. It was like someone had lobotomized it. As it stood there, drool began dripping from its mouth, pooling on the floor. I introduced myself and got to work. So, what's going on with Mutt today? Keaton didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted to the ceiling, like he was watching something flutter above us. Oh, he just ain't acting right. He ain't been eating much. This is usually where clients start rambling. So it could go on for hours if you let them. But he was done, still staring at the ceiling through those dirty locks of hair. When I knelt to take the dog's heart rate, the second my fingers touched its skin, a wrongness crawled into me. That tingle before lightning strikes. That creeping dread when something awful is about to happen. The vitals were normal, heart rate, breathing. But its skin was cold. 97 degrees, lower than we like. I tinted its skin, saw it was mildly dehydrated. But when I peeled back its loose lips to check its gums, I felt like I was too close to something I shouldn't be. The gums were pale. The pupils locked onto me. Dilated. It wasn't growling. No hackles raised. Just watching. Like it was restraining itself. That feeling of unease was sickening. "Don't turn your back on him," the man said. I paused, mid-turn. "Excuse me. If you're going to walk from him, do it fasten. Otherwise, something bad might happen." I exhaled sharply, irritated. He'd watched me get close to the dog, lean in, listen to it. Yet now he decided to warn me it was aggressive. I liked this situation less and less. The man, the dog, the way this whole thing sat in my gut like spoiled food. I backed away, facing the dog. It watched me, intently, like I was prey, like I was meat. A few moments later, our on-site emergency veterinarian, Dr. Harkham, came in. Old school, no nonsense. He and Keaton exchanged few words. The vet recommended blood work and an overnight stay with an 4 fluid drip. The dog needed warming up too. Keaton never lost that dumb smile, that half-cocked grin, like something was hilarious. But he nodded, accepted the treatment plan. We want to take the dog into the back treatment area. I slipped a muzzle on, of course, and that's when I noticed how the dog refused to walk. The owner had dragged it behind him earlier, but now, it wasn't lethargic. I could see in its eyes, It was choosing not to move. I had a larger male staff member, Ryan, carry the dog for me. As he picked it up, he glanced at me. We didn't exchange words, but I knew he felt it too. Not just the dog, the air. When we want to draw blood from its jugular, it didn't even react. Ryan held the dog steady, hands firm on either side of its head, jaws up. The needle slipped in. The syringe filled. The blood was cold. I ran it through the machines. Just mild dehydration. Some elevated lipase hinting at pancreatitis. No infection. Nothing to explain why it was so cold. We placed it into a heated kennel, tucked it in with blankets, hooked up the 4 catheter. I was relieved when Keaton left. That was 3 days ago. That night was quiet. Rare for an emergency hospital. We had another dog kenneled 2 spaces down from the Rottweiler. A cattle dog that had undergone emergency laparotomy. It had been doing fine. Normal vitals. Good appetite. Responsive. 2 hours later, I checked on it, and the cattle dog was dead. It had torn open its own incision. Somehow, it had gotten its cone off, and it had attacked itself. Not licking, not nibbling, mutilating. Even when coils of intestine unfurled from its abdomen, it had kept biting at those guts. Like they were coiled snakes, and he was killing them. The dog was slouched over, head limp against the floor. The blood ran in bright ribbons, swirling toward the kennel drain behind him, which slurped up the blood greedily. The kennel was a bloodbath. It streaked the walls, spattered the ceiling. His intestines had leaked bile and partially digested sludge. The cattle dog's eyes were vacant orbs, glistening in the light. I stood still for a moment, taking in the horror, the violence, and 2 kennels down. Mutt, sitting, watching, fluid drip running, heater humming, lips curled back, not panting, not whining, just smiling. His eyes reflected the fluorescent light, and for 1 sickening second, they looked almost human. Dr. Harkin made the call, but I heard every word, every choked sob through the thin walls of our office. The owner didn't just cry. They wailed. I'd seen plenty of death in this job, but this was different. This wasn't bad luck. Something else had its hands in this. The mood in the hospital shifted. In all my years, I'd never seen a dog unzip itself like a gym bag and spill out its intestines. Each time we walked past Mutt's kennel, his head turned slowly to follow. Each bloody towel, each mop bucket. Every time we passed the cattle dog-sized body bag, zip-tied and labeled, Mutt watched. That night was quiet, but it didn't feel like a break. It felt like I was watching thunderheads forming in the distance. The promise of something worse to come. At some point, hours after the cattle dog's death, I heard the steady beeping of a monitor from the kennel ward. The 4-pump hooked up to Mutt. I didn't want to go, but I did. I brought Ryan. We slipped the muzzle over Mutt's head easily. Too easily. He didn't resist, didn't flinch, just let it happen. His eyes followed the movement of our hands as we buckled it snugly behind his head. Only his eyes moved. 2 dark orbs. Watching. Digesting. The dog had kinked the 4-line beneath its paw. We moved it aside, smoothed it out. That should have been it. A simple fix. But as we turned to leave, the light above his kennel flickered. At first, just a slight flicker. Barely noticeable. Then it sputtered, dimmed, and cut out completely. The kennel dropped into shadow. Ryan and I froze. The only light now was a faint glow from the hallway behind us. We exchanged a glance. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us wanted to acknowledge what we were feeling. The air in the room changed. Heavy, buzzing like the static before storm. Then the 2 tube lights above, Mutt's kennel flared so bright it hurt to look at them. A pop, then a sizzle. And they died. Everything was silent. Ryan's back was to Mutt. Mutt lunged. A surge of violence. Muzzle strapped tight, body lunging forward. Mutt slammed his head against Ryan's side, ramming into him again and again. Ryan screamed. The dog was silent, except for the mechanical snapping of his jaws, working beneath the muzzle. Spittle flying. Ryan twisted, trying to stand, but the sudden attack had taken him off guard. I reacted without thinking. Threw open the kennel door. Mutt rammed into Ryan again, harder this time. The sheer force knocked him off balance. Ryan writhed around to grab Mutt. The moment he faced Mutt, the dog stilled. It stood there, silent, watching, bathed in the new darkness. Something was wrong with this dog. Not neurologically. Something deeper. It felt intelligent. It felt calculating. It felt evil. Ryan was shaken, and so was I. But we didn't talk about it. We just got out of there. The rest of the night passed without incident. I focused on my other cases, a Chihuahua with pneumonia, a Persian cat having low-grade seizures, a tabby with proprioception deficits. I went through the motions, but my mind was elsewhere. Ryan seemed dazed, like something fresh had broken inside of him. It wasn't just shock, or trauma, or fear. It was more profound than that. I left for the night, still shaken. Ryan didn't even wave goodbye. I chain-smoked cigarettes in my car before driving home. Flicked the butts out the window. My hands were shaking the entire ride. And when I finally collapsed into bed, I pulled my pistol out of my purse and slipped it under my pillow. And as the sun crept over the horizon, my dreams were wrong. I dreamed of a black face snarling in the dark, leaning in, sniffing, eyes like hollow pits, endless swirling voids, teeth sinking into my flesh, not a bite, not an attack, but a slow, deliberate pressure, easing into my skin. When I woke, my sheets were damp with sweat. When I came in for my shift that night, I felt a deep sense of disappointment the second I walked past Mutt's kennel. He was still there, heater purring, eyes following. The lights above his kennel were still blown out. The ones beside them had started to flicker. Ryan called out sick, said he'd been throwing up since the night before. I had a feeling there was more to the story, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. I shot him a text, wishing him well. He read it, didn't reply, and that sinister, eerie man who called himself Keaton, his phone went straight to dial tone when we tried calling for a case update. He wasn't coming back. He'd paid half his bill up front in crisp, old $100 bills. We weren't getting the other half. The night was busier. I told my manager we shouldn't put any other dogs in that ward, but we didn't have a choice. Our small animal ward was on the other side of the building, but for the larger dogs, they had to go there. We admitted a Great Dane with liver disease. There was nowhere else to put him. So I placed him in the kennel farthest from Mutt, 2 down from the cattle dog that had ripped itself apart. When I went back to check on him 10 minutes later, I stopped cold. Mutt's kennel was wide open. The latch was undone. The door swung open. He wasn't on fluids anymore. No pump to beep. No leash. No sign of how it had happened. Just him, sitting at the threshold, staring, slack-jawed. I shut the kennel, latched it securely, left the room, came back with 2 plates of food. Immediately, I felt nauseous. The kennel was open again. I hadn't heard a sound, hadn't seen the door move. The only way to unlatch these kennels is with hands, with opposable thumbs. I slammed it shut again, this time locking it with a makeshift carabiner clip. I slid 1 plate of food under each kennel. Low fat for the Dane, critical care for Mutt. I was walking away when I heard it. A sound that froze me. Not a growl, not a whine. It sounded like someone trying to speak through a mouth full of water. Like a deep, male voice gargling on words before spitting them out. A dog trying to talk. I turned. Mutt sat there, watching, silent now. Something tingled in the air. But the Dane had begun to cry. His plate of food lay, spilled across the kennel floor. His hackles were raised, his body pressed against the back wall, eyes flicking toward the ceiling. He was feeling something. Something deep and inexplicable. I felt it too. When I reached for the kennel bars, the crying stopped. The Dane's body trembled. Then his whimpering changed, deepened. A low, eerie sound, like a tornado siren. Then it stopped altogether. The dog went still. Too still. Then all at once, he attacked his own leg. Not chewing. Not licking. Ripping. Breaking. Deep, pulverizing bites. Bone cracked. Blood spattered the kennel floor. It wasn't a dog in pain. It wasn't a dog in distress. It was something else. Something destroying itself with purpose. I couldn't go in there. If I did, he'd likely redirect onto me, send me to the hospital. I turned and ran, shouting for help as I sprinted through the clinic. Dr. Harkham and 2 other techs, Angie and Denise, came rushing out of an exam room at the sound of my frantic screaming. I grabbed a rabies catch pole. The Dane was still going. The flesh of its leg hung in shreds, barely attached. Blood spurted like shots from a water gun, pulsing in rhythm with its heartbeats from a severed artery. I slipped open the kennel and looped the catch pole around its neck, tightening it hard, wrenching its head just enough to stop it from lunging. It snapped at the air, frantic but no emotion behind it. Then it latched onto the metal pole. Not out of panic, not out of rage, out of a bizarre corruption of instinct. The sound was unbearable, teeth breaking against metal, splintering, shattering. The flesh of its leg was nearly gone. Just a ragged mess of meat and exposed bone that flapped as it chewed at the metal. I saw part of a fractured canine fall out of its mouth. The catch pole was bloody, dented but holding firm. The dog was weakening by the time Dr. Harkham arrived, slumping over in the pile of its own blood. By the time we managed to inject a sedative, it was too late. The blood loss was too severe. The Dane fully collapsed to the floor, body twitching, biting. All at once, its eyes glazed over, and it went still. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mutt, lips pulled back in a snarl, smiling. When is that fucking dog going to leave? I snapped, pointing at him. Dr. Harkham shot me a sharp look. His white coat was streaked with blood. His eyes were dark, hollowed with exhaustion. Something is wrong with it, I insisted. With him, all I see is a dog who just mutilated itself in our care, he said. The second one in 2 days. Don't worry about that fucking dog. We have bigger issues here. I have another owner to call. Another person I have to tell their pet killed itself. Under my watch. He flicked blood from his fingers, dragged a sleeve across his face. He was years past burnout, a shell of his former self. He couldn't see what I saw. He couldn't see the way Mutt watched, the way his eyes lingered over the carnage pooling beneath my feet, like he was enjoying it. Dr. Harkham sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. We tried calling that creepy bastard again. Number's out of service. He ditched the dog on us. That meant we had to rehome it. It could take weeks. I couldn't take weeks with him. None of us could. And as I looked into Angie's eyes, I knew she felt the same. The hospital settled into an uneasy silence. The night shift pressed on, but something had shifted. We were all exhausted, hollowed out by what we'd seen. The cattle dog, the Great Dane, the blood. Mutt still sat in his kennel, untouched food at his feet, heater humming. Watching. 2 more lights flickered out while I cleaned. I mopped blood from the floors, the thick iron scent clinging to my skin. The towels we used to soak up the mess were soaked through a deep, ugly red. And through it all, Mutt never looked away. I told myself I'd figure something out. I just needed time. But time wasn't on my side. I was dumping a load of bloody towels into the laundry bin when I heard it. Elia hissed. I dropped everything. A voice, thick and wet, slurred in a way no dog's throat was built to produce. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't a growl. It was trying to speak. And what came out wasn't just a sound. It was a name. My name. Allison. I turned, stomach lurching. Mutt was sitting in his kennel. Still, muzzle slack, drool pooling on the blanket beneath him. His pupils swallowed the light. I couldn't move. My brain was trying to rationalize it, trying to shove what I had just heard into a box of normalcy. Maybe I'd misheard. Maybe it was the pipes or monitor or... But then the smell hit me. Old. Not just the smell of the hospital, not just the faint antiseptic and animal musk that always clung to the air. This was meat left in the sink for weeks. This was something dead wedged into the cracks of the world. And I realized then, the smell I'd caught when Keaton first walked into the lobby, that greasy, putrid stench. It hadn't been him. It had been the dog. I ran. I grabbed the blankets off the floor, shoved them into the laundry bin, and bolted. My hands shook as I crammed the lid shut. My pulse was a hammer in my ears. Don't turn your back on it. The memory of Keaton's words crawled down my spine like a cold hand. He's acting possessed. I knew what Mutt had tried to do to Ryan. I knew what he wanted to do to me. And now I knew. I wasn't waiting for him to act. I was going to kill him. I kept my head down the rest of the shift, biding my time. My mind wasn't on the cases I took. I worked on autopilot. I went through the motions, but my body was moving without me. And when I got a moment alone, I pulled up 20 milliliters of pentobarbital sodium and phenytoin sodium solution. Euthisol, the sparkling pink liquid we use to put animals down. I took enough to kill a dog, twice Mutt's size. There'd be a discrepancy in the controlled substance log, but I could smooth it out over the next few weeks. A couple of slightly higher doses on euthanasia cases, logged with enough time between them, and no one would notice. I locked the cabinet, slid the syringe into my pocket. I was committing a crime, breaking DEA laws. I could lose my license, my career, even end up in jail. But deep in my bones, I knew one thing. That thing in the kennel. It needed to die. The next morning, when I arrived for my shift, the hospital was heavy with grief. Everyone was crying. Ryan was dead. He'd taken his own life in his trailer sometime after leaving work. No details. No explanation. Just gone. The police had come by to inform us. They didn't stay long. Didn't need to. I knew then. It cemented in my mind what had to be done. I don't know how, but I knew. I didn't wait. I worked through the grief, through the horror, pushing it all into a place I'd deal with later. I waited for the right moment. A lull between shift changes when staffing was light. I approached Mutt's kennel. His head was cocked, eyes tracking me. He looked almost expectant. I opened the kennel door and slid the muzzle over his face quickly. My hands moved with a sharpness I hadn't felt before. I yanked the straps too tight. My pulse was steady. I leaned out of the room, peered around the corner. No one coming. I held Mutt's paw, feeling for the vein, my other hand already slipping the needle beneath the skin. The syringe in my palm felt hot. I pushed the plunger. It was difficult, so much volume to inject. But I pushed it all. Every last drop. Normally, when an animal is euthanized, it happens fast. They slump. Their eyes stay open. Their bodies give up. Mutt didn't move. I could have killed a human with this much euthasol. But he just sat there. I stared at him, heart pounding, my breath coming sharp. They usually pass away before the syringe is empty. Their bodies relax. Their eyes go distant. The tension of life slipping from them like a sigh. Mutt's body stayed rigid, his breath steady. The drug should have shut him down immediately, but his muscles held, his head remained lifted, eyes locked onto mine. A chill crawled down my spine. This dog should be dead. Then the hallway lights flickered. One by one, the bulbs sizzled out, plunging the kennel ward into darkness. The air thickened, heavy with the weight of something unseen. The heater stopped. The only glow came from the exit sign at the far end of the hall, casting a weak green wash over the kennels. The shadows twisted around me. I couldn't move. The door to the kennel slammed shut behind me. My breath hitched. The silence was absolute. The only sound was the slow, wet rasp of Mutt's breathing. I could feel him in the dark, the weight of his presence gnawing at the air. Eliaston's. The voice came from the kennel. Thick, gurgling wrong. A sound like a dog learning to speak, like a throat filled with gravel, trying to shape words. The vowel stretched, dripping with something slick and inhuman. My stomach lurched. I reached for the latch, fingers fumbling, but my hands were slick with sweat. My breathing was too loud. The darkness pressed in. The rot smell thickened, crawling on my throat. Then I felt it. A cold, dead hand close around my ankle. I choked on a scream. My body jolted as something gripped me, nails pressing into my skin, curling against the fabric of my scrubs. The air turned electric, static snapping against my skin. I turned and ran. The door gave way beneath my shoulder, and I burst into the hallway, feet pounding against the tile. Behind me, I heard the kennel door smash open, the sound of paws, heavy and fast, hitting the ground. He was coming. I sprinted blindly through the dark, my shoulder slamming into the wall as I searched for the door handle. My fingers scraped smooth wood, no knob, no latch, just cold, endless surface. Paws pounded closer. No growling, no snarling, no warning, just movement. A silent freight train barreling toward me. I spun, pressing my back against the door. The darkness was absolute, thick and suffocating. The emergency lights had died, swallowing the building in shadow. But I could hear him, breathing. Slow, wet, thick with something I couldn't name. Then a whisper of movement, so close I felt the air shift. I bolted down the hall. No thought, no plan, just instinct. My body moved. I reached my locker, yanked it open, hands scrambling for my purse. The air behind me shifted. A weight, a presence. I felt it before I saw it. A void, yawning open. My fingers closed around cold metal. The grip of my handgun. I turned, raised the barrel, and fired. The first shot lit up the hall like a camera flash. In that brief flicker, I saw him, that snarling grin. The second shot, the third. His body jerked, but he didn't fall. His lips were still curled back in that awful rictus. The sixth and final shot hit its mark. The left side of his skull caved inward, the muzzle of his face blown apart. His jaw sagged open, tongue limp. And even as he fell, his head twitched. A violent, unnatural snap of movement. A thick, wet pop echoed down the hall. He swayed. Then, finally, he dropped. I stood there, gun trembling in my hands, ears ringing. The darkness still pulsed around me, thick and heavy, pressing in from all sides. Then footsteps, shouts, voices. Someone grabbed my arm, yanking me back. The lights flickered, buzzed, then flared back to life. And for the first time, I saw what I had done. One shot had buried itself in the tile. The rest had hit him. Mutt lay on his side, his head a ruin of blood and bone. His chest rose once, twice. Then he went still. The bite muzzle was missing. He must have pulled it off somewhere during the chase. I didn't move. The hospital swarmed with people. Cops were called. Questions were asked. I barely registered any of it. They took me into the back office, my hands still shaking, my ears still filled with phantom echoes. I knew what I had to say. I knew how to frame it. Self-defense. I played the part well. The police let me go. Mo was wrapped, bagged, stuffed in our freezer, waiting for cremation. I took time off work, spent days in silence, trying to erase the memory of that voice. It didn't work. The morning I was supposed to return for my shift, I got a phone call. Blocked number. I answered. Slow, shaky breathing filled the line. Then he began to laugh. Low, drawling, thick with something I couldn't name. A mouth full of tobacco chew. Or blood. You shouldn't have killed it, little lady. Keaton. His voice slithered through the speaker, curling like a snake around my spine. His laughter built, rising, filling the silence. You've just gone and made things so much worse. And as the laughing turned into hollering, the line clicked dead. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, staring at nothing. His words sank into my bones. Gone, and made things so much worse. My first thought was confusion. How'd he get my number? My second thought was frantic. Those words struck a chord deep inside my marrow. He said I made things worse. And for some reason, deep down in my soul, I believed him.
Story 2.
I had worked construction for the better part of my 20s before the accident. I never had the know-how to get into engineering school like my parents wanted for me, but I preferred to work with my hands anyhow. Jobs came and went, contracts ended, but ultimately I always had a site to work or a building to put up. When the Whitlam Hawthorne Group offered me a foreman position for the construction project of their new headquarters, I accepted in a heartbeat. Job security from a company like WHG, with a salary I'd only dreamed of and benefits to match. I thought it would be stupid not to accept. The foundation had barely been poured on the site when the collapse happened. No one knew who exactly was to blame, whether it was the surveyors, the engineers, or just some freak accident. But those of us caught in the rubble only had the parent company to point our fingers at. 3 men dead and 13 injured was apparently a serious enough legal threat that Whitlam Hawthorne opted to offer us each a generous settlement outside of court. You can judge all you want that my silence was bought, but 6 zeros on a check would buy yours too. In addition, they also offered me a systems job I'd be able to work from home, and even a reduced renter's rate at one of their apartment complexes in a unit that would accommodate the wheelchair I'd be confined to the rest of my life. Until then, I didn't even know that they owned any residential properties, but the complex looked decent enough on the pamphlet they sent me. After all, I certainly couldn't live alone in my current 4th-floor apartment anymore. I moved in near the beginning of February last year. I won't lie, the adjustment to everything at once hit me a lot harder than it should have. Overnight, I had gone from working outside every day to being restricted to a wheelchair I had no intuition for using and being stuck inside all day long. My hard hat and boots swapped for a work laptop and a filing cabinet. The depression caused by my new situation was only worsened when I got settled in. It was embarrassing how little I owned that would still be practical given my new lifestyle, so it didn't take long for the movers to bring everything over. I was moved in less than a day after I got out of the hospital. The apartment was a first-floor unit for obvious reasons. The second and third floors each had units with patio balconies that extended an outcrop over my minuscule, fenced-in yard. As a result, the already tiny windows in my living room barely got any sunlight during the day. Off to the side of my living room, I had a kitchen with lowered countertops and extended storage space on the lower shelves. My bedroom was spacious, with a wheelchair-accessible closet and a roomy attached bathroom. I wish I could say I was thankful, but the accommodations only reminded me that I'd never live the same life again. Please don't get me wrong. I'm absolutely not one of those guys who sees disability as something that makes someone lesser. My aunt was a wheelchair user when I was growing up, and I had an older brother with special needs. Both of them had my respect for as long as they'd lived. But both of them had died because in one way or another, they depended on something that couldn't be provided for them. In her old age, my aunt fell out of her chair at home one day and didn't have the arm strength to crawl back up or reach the phone. The medics said that her pets had begun to eat her even before she died. My brother ended his own life because my parents refused to get him the help he needed. I still won't talk to my family for that. And now, after almost 30 years of independence and ability, it seemed as though every one of my prospects was ripped from me, and I was entirely dependent on the company that had caused it. In short, I was very, very bitter. In June of that year, it was as hot as it had ever been in my state. By then, I'd settled into a dull routine. Wake up, do a few arm exercises before I showered, eat breakfast, and then try to get some work done before lunch. What I did could barely qualify as work, but it seemed like the company thought it would be better to have me under NDA and payroll than risk me suing. Once lunch came around, I would check my fridge for groceries and add what I was running low on to my weekly mobile delivery order. It was so much easier to have someone else leave groceries at my front door than to find a way to actually get to a supermarket. I found a routine where I honestly never had to leave the apartment. I avoided human interaction those days, so it was easy to stay inside. The only voices I heard for months were my neighbors. From what I could tell, I lived underneath a married couple that never stopped fighting, and in the unit next to me, there was an older woman with at least a couple more cats than our lease allowed. On one particular morning mid-June, as I got out of the shower and dried my head, I opened my eyes to find that the power in my apartment had suddenly gone out. It was inevitable. Everyone on the block had to have their AC units on blast. I finished drying off, and for the first time since I moved in, rolled over to the curtained sliding door attached to my living room and went out into my small yard, where I knew I'd find a breaker box. The outside air was hot and heavy, and as I watched my toes brush against grass that they couldn't feel, I noticed that without the noise of the AC units running outside, it was very, very quiet. Not even the sound of insects or birds filled the morning air, and for a moment, I let the morning sun rest on my face before it would rise behind the patio, overshadowing my yard. For as short as it lasted, the peace that overwhelmed me was blissful. The silence was interrupted by the sound of a sliding door from above, creaking wood and the sound of footsteps, followed by the familiar arguing voices I'd grown painfully accustomed to. If you don't want to fix it, then I will. The wife's voice grew louder as she moved above me. I never said I wouldn't do it. I said, give me a damn minute to put my shoes on. Why do you always dash? I zoned out as their arguing continued above. Even the briefest joy was fleeting, I thought, as I opened my own fuse box and flipped the breakers. I heard my AC unit were to life from outside my fence, muddying the soundscape once more with its mechanical whine. At least it drowned out the arguing above. As I struggled to figure out how to roll back over the lip on the sliding door, I heard the arguing stop and the couple's sliding door slide shut and close above me. I managed to get back inside and hoped I wouldn't have to go out again anytime soon. I'm ashamed to admit that was the last time I went outside for months. I'd gone no contact with the rest of my family years ago, and what few friends I had lived out of state. I had no reason to go out anymore, so the summer's heat paired with my depression only forced me inwards. Wake up, shower, eat breakfast, work all day, sleep. Even the arguments upstairs and the occasional meow from the unit next to me became monotonous. I drowned as much of it out as I could. The same voices, the same fights, the same cats misbehaving day in and day out. In fact, as much as I tried to ignore it, sometimes I couldn't help but listen in. The woman who lived above me, whose name I gathered to be Claire, was seemingly unemployed. She rarely spoke unless it was to accost her husband for wrongdoing or to complain. Her husband, whose name was Jason maybe? He seemed to have some anger issues, but seemed more defensive than aggressive. Cold and distant paired with irritable and sensitive. A perfect storm. I never gathered the cat lady's name. Instead, I became very familiar with Greta, Priscilla, and Tom. Every day, the woman would try to quiet Tom for crying too loud for food, and sometime in the afternoon she would accost Greta and Priscilla for fighting over a nap spot in the sunbeam. Having natural sunlight enter the room sounded like heaven. The voices were my only human connection. It was mid-September when I attempted to clear my throat of my developing allergies that I realized I hadn't heard my own voice in months. I cried myself to sleep that night, feeling more alone than I'd ever been. By October, the isolation became unbearable. I found myself listening to the voices more than I ever had wanted to, quieting my apartment as much as possible just to catch them when I could. The same fights, complaints, meows. They became my friends, my comfort. One night, out of some sense of desperation, or maybe just a form of entertainment for myself, I started responding. It wasn't much at first, just a quiet whisper in response to Claire's complaints. When I heard her hiss, "You never listen to me," I whispered, "I'm listening." When Jason or whatever his name was, sighed and muttered, "Christ, I can't do this," I chucked and stuttered out a quiet, "Me neither." I don't know why I kept it up. Maybe just to hear my own voice. Maybe because, in a pathetic way, it made me feel like I was connecting with someone. I knew it was stupid and illogical, but it made things feel just a little less empty. It became a kind of game for me. Each night, I sat in the dim light of my apartment, sipping from one drink too many, and I listened. I let their words become ours. The fights, the meows, the mild chit-chat. When Claire snapped, "You never take me seriously anymore," I whispered, "Of course I do." When the old woman called out at Tom, scolding him for knocking something over, I grinned and mumbled, "Bad cat." It was more than a game, it was all I had. Then, about a week after I'd started, I noticed it for the first time. Claire had just shouted, "For once in your life, admit that I might be right." I responded instinctively, "Why should I when you're wrong?" Before I could finish my words, from above, her husband's voice exclaimed back to her, "But why should I when you're wrong?" I paused. For a minute or so, I sat intently listening. I knew her words had sounded familiar, but had I heard them have the same argument before? I brushed it off at first. Of course it sounded familiar. I've been listening to their fights for months. I'd probably heard them bring up the same talking points 100 times. Often enough that subconsciously, I probably just knew what he was likely to say. But then, the next day, it happened again. "Is it that hard to get my car's registration done? I've been overdue for almost a week," Claire snapped. And I knew for a fact that I had heard that before. Not just something like it. Those exact words, in that exact tone, in that exact order. That in itself could have been explainable, except the first time I noticed it had been in August. Her registration hadn't been expired for a week at this point. It had been almost 2 months. I turned off my AC and listened harder. My heart thumped against my ribs. If it's no big deal, why can't you go get it done for me? There. She'd said that part too, I thought. I swallowed and realized my mouth had gone dry, my palms beginning a cold sweat as I grappled with the feeling that they'd done this all before many times. Coincidence. That's all it was. Maybe their fights really were that predictable. I told myself to ignore it, but I couldn't. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, my ears straining to pick up what was being said above me. I tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid, but something felt wrong. The next day, I kept notes of what little I could hear around me on my computer. In the past, I paid little attention to what was being said and when, but on that day, I was meticulous. I kept every fan off. I didn't run my laundry. I skipped my shower. I did everything in my power to keep my home as quiet as possible to maintain the ability to transcribe every word being said. From the old woman next to me, 8:15 a.m., Oh, Tommy Tom, be quiet. I fed you already. From upstairs, 8:17 a.m., Claire on the phone. Yes, he left for work. No, it'll just be me here until he comes home for lunch. 12:32, upstairs again. Jason, I told you not to slam the front door when you come in. You scare the hell out of me every time. All throughout the day, anything that I could struggle to make out, I made note of. The next morning I awoke earlier than usual. I had my notes and I had some time, so I showered and made my way to the middle of the apartment to listen once again. I sat eagerly waiting, checking my watch and waiting for signs of life. Then, from the apartment adjacent to mine, at exactly 8:15 in the morning, the woman began to speak. Oh, Tommy Tom, be quiet. I fed you already. 8:17. Yes, he left for work. No, it'll just be me here until he comes home for lunch. And more. All morning long, I listened in awestruck silence at my entire day's transcription being reenacted word for word, minute by minute. By the time 12:32 rolled around and Claire complained about the door slamming, I was sickened to realize that on neither day nor any other had I ever actually heard their door slam shut. As if the same script was being read over and over, just muffled enough and just faint to keep me from noticing. I needed air, so I did something I hadn't done in months. I left my apartment. I struggled to wheel out into the complex's courtyard, squinting against the sunlight, the fresh air strange but refreshing against my skin. The apartment building wrapped around in a neat, uniform U shape with a mirroring building just across the narrow parking lot. The second and third floor balconies of each building were stacked like dull concrete shelves above my head. I looked up at the couple's unit just above mine. The small windows all had their blinds wide open, but I couldn't make out movement inside. I wheeled turned to look at the unit next to mine where the old woman lived. Blinds open, but the same, no movement inside. I realized quickly that every unit in my building and the building across the way was the same. Blinds open, no signs of life. I sat there for nearly an hour, watching. Not a single shadow moved behind the windows. No doors opened. No one entered or left the building. The silence pressed against me as I realized that not only were there no people visible to me, there was no movement at all. No beds, no passing cars, no distant voices from other tenants. Just the wind and the faint mechanical hum of the AC units. Living isolated will do strange things to your mind. It'll make you keep track of things that societal norms would normally remind you of, but it also makes you ignore glaring truths right under your nose. It wasn't until I sat there, utterly confused, that I suddenly realized that I had never seen my neighbors. Not once. Not leaving their doors. Not in the parking lot. Not on their balconies, despite hearing their voices out there almost every night. I hadn't even spoken to anyone in person when I moved in. I'd filled out all of my paperwork online, and I'd been driven here by a company vehicle when the mover said they brought everything over. A sick feeling crept into my stomach. I had lived here for 8 months. 8 months of hearing these people argue, of hearing the woman behind me talk to her cats, and I had never once seen another human being in the flesh. The implication had barely begun to set in when, almost in reaction to my realization, the blinds in the apartment next to mine suddenly closed shut. They were followed only a few seconds later by those belonging to the unit upstairs, and in almost a cascade, all of the open blinds for every unit in the building were closed. I moved faster than I ever had in my chair. I wheeled quickly out of the little courtyard and into the parking lot street. Surely, there had to be a leasing office somewhere nearby. As I reached the lot, I looked both ways and saw only rows and rows of identical buildings, the blinds on each slowly closing, the movement rippling away from me for what seemed like miles of units. I had never realized the scale of the complex. As I hustled to find any building that stuck out, I noted that I still saw absolutely nobody. Empty cars parked in lots, bicycles leaning against fences, varying patio furniture, even children's toys left on sidewalks as though they'd be returned shortly. All signs of life, but without any life at all to be seen. After about 20 minutes of searching for any indication of an office, I returned to my home. My arms were exhausted from moving more than I had in a long time, and I knew I couldn't keep searching forever. I made it back to my unit not long after. with the surrounding windows blocked from view by obtrusive blinds. My home felt bleak, solitary among the rest of them. It didn't help that I knew that somehow I really was the only one here. I made it back inside and closed the front door behind me. Not 1 second later, as I turned to go to my room, a chime startled me, and I realized that my doorbell had been rung. I immediately turned back to reopen door, but outside there was no one to be seen. Just my weekly grocery delivery sitting neatly on my doormat, impossibly waiting where it hadn't been only 5 seconds prior. The following days were a blur. Had there actually been anyone outside to look at my apartment, they would have seen me wildly going from window to window, peering through blinds like a tweaker waiting on a package. For about a week, all of the arguing, the meowing, the idle conversation that had repeatedly permeated my walls went absolutely silent. Whatever was going on, it caught wind of my curiosity and stopped, as though to gather itself and prepare. And prepare it must have, since when the sounds of human voices and interactions reappeared a week later, they'd changed. New arguments, new discussions, even a new cat supposedly added to the bunch. The second day that the voices were back, I noticed that they were different from the day before. The conversations were new the next day as well, and the day after that. For 7 days, I almost allowed myself to believe that maybe I'd been imagining things. I even began to hear the occasional car outside, slowly creeping past. Maybe something I somehow hadn't noticed before. On the 8th day of the return of the noises, however, my heart sank. Repeated phrases, returning arguments, and interactions that I'd already hastily taken note of 1 week prior. The next day followed suit. They'd learned, but only a little bit. Whatever loop was being played for me was now a whole week's worth of audio, not just a day's worth. Even the passing cars returned exactly at the times I'd remarked the week prior, but now that I was looking for them, I could tell that they were driverless. 2 weeks had passed since I left my apartment, and a thought occurred to me. What would happen if I tried to interrupt the routine? I checked my notes of the prior 2 weeks and began to prepare a plan. The next day, the old woman would chastise her cats for ganging up on the new kitten at exactly 9:13 and 3 seconds. However, I would knock on her door at 9:13, hopefully forcing whatever charade was about to be performed for me to have to adjust. The next morning, I prepare myself. I shave for the first time in weeks, and I made sure I looked as presentable as possible. I couldn't give them any reason or excuse to not open the door for me. I waited in front of the door for about 2 minutes, my eyes locked onto my wristwatch and my ears as alert as they'd ever been. The very second my little Casio turned 9:13, I knocked as loudly as I could without sounding aggressive, and was sure to stop knocking in less than the 3 seconds it would take her to start speaking. I waited with bated breath, far longer than I think I should have. 3 seconds felt like a minute, and by the time an actual minute rolled around, hours had gone by in my mind. I was satisfied enough with my ability to interrupt the cycle, and as I turned my chair to return back home, something spoke to me from behind the door. "Who is it?" 3 words, 3 new words, spoken undeniably in response to me. But whatever was speaking to me was not an old woman. I don't know if I could even call a human. The words felt disjointed, as though stitched together from other phrases and distorted in a rushed attempt to sound coherent. I barely had time to collect my thoughts before the voice called out again. The words the same, but the cadence and tone shifted, attempting to emulate normal human speech. It sounded more natural, but it was still undeniably inhuman. "Who is it?" I'm your neighbor from next door." "Who is it?" The voice called once more as, to my horror, the door cracked open. I braced myself to see something horrible waiting for me inside, some mockery of a human being waiting to lunge at me from the darkness. But darkness, inky black and concealing, was all that greeted me from behind the door. The door opened in full, and as what little sunlight that could pour inside, there was absolutely no one inside. Absolutely no movement, no sign of life, save for a voice that called out from the doorway, now in perfect form. "Who is it?" I peered my head inside the doorway, and as I did, I felt myself through a threshold, icy and cold. Worse was the feeling of loneliness that seemed to inject itself into my veins, In all my months of being alone, I had never felt it quite so intensely as when I crossed through that door. As I entered the living room, only one thing about the otherwise unremarkable home stood out. A wheelchair, fallen over onto its side, lay in the middle of the floor. I couldn't see anything around it, but it was surrounded by sounds of slow, methodical chewing and the occasional tearing of flesh partnered with a hungry meow. I left immediately. After that day, the pre-written schedules changed more often and far more sporadically. Sometimes I would go days without hearing anything. Sometimes entirely new arguments would appear in days I thought I'd documented, and occasionally the cars that would pass would make a turn they hadn't before. Every action was hollow, though, and every voice was attached to nobody real. I knew that much for certain. I started to review my options. I hadn't seen another human being for the better part of a year by now, and I doubted there would change unless I somehow got out of this complex. But where would I go? There was no one to come and pick me up. I hadn't opened my work laptop in weeks, and I knew no one in whatever city I was in. Did I even know where I was at? I vaguely remembered the offer after the accident and the company men coming to get me from the hospital, and my mind struggled to remember the actual order of events that led me to living there. The more I puzzled it over, the less it made sense. As far as I could piece together, I had been in the accident, and some suits had visited me in the hospital when I woke up. They explained vaguely what happened and that the company wanted to avoid legal troubles, so they passed me over the check and a new job offer, as well as the pamphlet for the apartment. I remember signing my leasing information online from the hospital, and then I remember being brought here directly from there. Had it been that immediate? Had I been in such a daze I didn't recognize the strangeness of the situation? My thoughts were interrupted by a knock at my door. Not a doorbell, a knock. 3 solid knocks, echoing through my apartment. A chill ran as far down my spine as I still had feeling, and I slowly began to wheel myself towards the front door. I stopped in the kitchen to grab a knife on my way. Who's there? I asked, my voice tinged with panic. There was no answer for a moment. Then, softly and meticulously from the other side, I heard my own voice, broken and stitched together, called back to me. I'm your neighbor from next door. I flung the door open, brandishing the large steak knife out into the open air. I couldn't see anyone in front of me, but I knew that something was there. I sat, wildly swinging the knife in front of me, and the voice called again from right in front of my face. I'm your neighbor from next door. There was a shimmer in the air, a glint of sunlight, a distortion outlining a shape that was unambiguously humanoid, and it was entering the threshold of the door, slowly creeping towards me. This was my only chance. With all the strength I could muster, I hurled the knife towards the no one in my entryway, and as it passed through the glimmering shape, I knew so could I. I pushed myself towards the no one, and as I entered its form, a cold I'd only ever felt once before shot through my veins. The icy sting sought to freeze me in place, and the empty solitude that pressed in around me should have taken all the steam out of me. But I didn't let it. I could feel it now. It was real. It could be escaped. I made my way through the form, and as looked back as it turned towards me, its non-existent unbeing making haste to attempt to swallow me up once more. I was faster than it, though, and as I turned the corner out of the courtyard into the street, I forced myself to ignore the burning of my arms and kept pushing myself onward. As I rolled as fast as I could, I looked at the identical buildings surrounding me. Through every blind, through every cracked door, there was nothing and no one watching me. I felt eyes, hungry and jealous, piercing me from all sides. No one was trying to keep me here, but I wouldn't give it the satisfaction. I caught glimpses from my peripheral vision of glimmering nothings, clambering out of doors and emerging from parked cars. I felt chills run through my body once more as I must have passed through a group of them, their arms outstretched attempting to grab me. Whatever they were or weren't, I don't think they could touch me. But I could feel them. More and more of them piled out of front doors, sprinting towards me. The air around me began to ripple as they amassed in numbers. It reminded me of waves of heat emanating from the roofs of cars under the summer sun. No one's fingers clawed at me as I pushed through thousands of them. Voices crackled, warped, stitched together nonsense, surrounding me with their fractured cries. After what felt like eternity through the shimmering crowd that wasn't there, I saw what I'd been longing for, the end. I had reached the edge of the complex. It wasn't anything special as far as I could tell, no barrier or wall that would hinder my escape. I pushed myself harder and faster than my exhausted arms should have allowed, but every icy claw that passed through my blood renewed my vigor. The moment I crossed the threshold, the screams collapsed into silence. The air behind me felt full. No empty, frozen fingers, no warped voices. No nothing. I didn't dare look back though, not yet. I looked out ahead of me, and had never been more relieved to see a shitty Dollar General in my life. I cried sweet tears of joy when I laid eyes on a struggling jogger. Fat, sweaty human. I rolled over the crosswalk and came to rest at the bus stop across the street. I finally let my aching arms rest, and they collapsed to my sides. I sat for a moment, tears rolling down my cheeks and reeking of sweat and body odor. I must have looked insane even to the scraggly homeless man that sat on the bench, but I didn't care. He would never know it, but I loved him simply for being there. I eventually found my strength and wearily turned my wheelchair towards the complex that had entrapped me for a year of my life. I don't think I'll ever be able to explain what I saw. Before me lay an unassuming dirt lot, not larger than a football field. Unattended construction equipment lay dormant, and a porta-potty lay toppled and vandalized in the back corner. Surrounding the perimeter of the lot was a chain-link fence. A land development sign stood at the perimeter, its red letters crisp and clean, as if freshly posted. Beneath an artist's rendering of a sleek new building, the words, "Coming soon, Whitlam Hawthorne Research Complex." That's it for today's creepy Reddit tales. Before we go, I just want to say a quick thanks to all of you for watching, liking, and sticking around. You guys keep this channel going, and I'll be back soon with more stories that'll make your skin crawl. Drop a comment if you've got your own spooky tale to share, and I'll see you in the next one.